Okay, getting into the top 10. And number 10 is another game that people will say is incredibly flawed and disappointing. Fable slash Fable Anniversary, because they're kind of the same thing. Or I should say Fable the Lost Chapters or Fable Anniversary, take your pick. Fable is one of those games that everyone knows is kind of a joke. Everyone talks about how Peter Molyneux promised the world and gave them maybe an island. And that's fair. But when I was a kid, I didn't really follow video game news that much. I saw cool stuff came out and wanted to get it. So I didn't know about all the promises of Fable. And then I played it and I loved it. Playing through Fable, starting out as the young hero, going out, your family. Heck, my desktop on my computer is a Fable one right now. It's the artwork from Fable The Lost Chapters or Fable Anniversary, whichever you want to say this spot on the list goes to. Like, Fable's just so, again, it comes back to gameplay. Like, the game is pretty simple to play, but feeling yourself grow up as a hero. It's silly to call yourself as your title, but it's just, just be a grassroots hero. Go kill a wasp. That's your first main quest as a hero, is go kill this giant wasp. And from there, you go on to fight Jack of Blades as a dragon. Yeah, spoilers, sorry. But go watch the Let's Play, come back, and then agree with me. Like, that game takes you on the ride from nothing to something great. And going from dinky clothes to heavy plate armor, giant swords, magic. Obviously not the most advanced magic system. It's not like Dragon Age where you have hundreds of spells almost. Not hundreds, but you know what I mean. But you have a lot of spells at your disposal. You can really become a spell slinger, become an archer who just uses a dagger and swings really fast, or become just a giant tank with a big sword. All those are really open, and you can do good and bad deeds, and the world does sort of react. Everyone treats you differently. If you're a good guy, if you're a bad guy, your appearance changing, while kind of silly, especially when you get devil horns, is still awesome. You still are evolving as a character, and you can visibly see it and feel it. So, for all of its flaws, and for all the people who were let down by Molyneux's hype, personally, I love Fable Anniversary, and I think you should too. Number 9 on this list is probably the most likely to get me flack from people who have watched my Let's Plays. But number 9 on this list is the first Ground Control. Could probably expand it to the series if you wanted to, but I chose to put the first Ground Control in here by itself. Now, I'm sure people are immediately thinking if they watch the Let's Play, Tim, you cheated in the Let's Play. You used God mode for half the campaign. How could you possibly justify this as your 9th favorite game of all time when you cheated? Well, because it was awesome. Building your loadout of just 12 squads, like much lower on the list, not much, 15, was World in Conflict. The same people who made Ground Control years later, after making Ground Control Dark Conspiracy and Ground Control 2, made World in Conflict. And a lot of the themes remain the same. And that's a great game too. But Ground Control brought in sci-fi, which I love. I still remember the first time I saw the cutscene where the Astrid is in orbit over Craig 7B and it shoots down the Dawn transport, and Major Parker's talking about loading up her troops and everything. That game really knows how to scale you up. 30 campaign missions where you start out with just an APC and 2 infantry squads who have no special weapons. And from there you go on to lead this massive army. And then you start over and do it again with a whole new faction. It's so much fun. Like, I did cheat, and I don't think I ever have beaten the campaign without cheats. But I don't care. It's just so much fun to play. I love driving tanks around. I love zooming in the camera and watching the heavy pterodynes or hoverdynes make their little whirring noises and chug along on the ground. It's so much fun to me to just turn on God mode and sit and just fly around in the camera mode, watching the guys shoot, watching infantry walk over hills, pouring fire onto a position, sending main battle pterodines against a bunch of heavy hoverdynes and watching the plasma and shells careen back and forth. It's one of those few games that's really cinematic on its own, but it's so much fun. I just love it. I love ground control, and it's probably clearly it's one of my favorite down-to-earth RTSs. It's got the sci-fi. It's got what I think is a really good story that was maybe let down by the later games, except for Ground Control 2, which has one of my favorite cinematics of all time, so I guess you could add Ground Control 2 to this entry. But it's just so much fun. I know I keep saying that, but it's all true about all these, so yeah, number 9, Ground Control. Coming in at number 8 on this list is basically my version of Resident Evil, Dead Space 2. Why not Dead Space 1, you ask? Well, everyone talks about how Resident Evil 4 is one of their favorite games ever. I know a lot of people who've said that Resident Evil 4 is possibly the best game ever made. And that's fine. I'm not going to say that that's not true, because everyone has their own opinion on that. But I never played Resident Evil. I had a friend who liked Resident Evil 1 for the GameCube, the remake, but I never played old Resident Evil. So for me, when I finally got to play Dead Space 1, I was blown away. I loved Dead Space 1. Dead Space 1 is a great game. But the reason Dead Space 2 is on this list is because unlike Resident Evil 5, which I did play compared to 4, Dead Space 2 took Dead Space 1 and made it better in every way. Maybe the story isn't quite as good, but I would actually say that Dead Space 2's story is even better. Just like moments like going back on the Ishimura and seeing all the rooms you were in just covered in biohazard symbols and knowing what happened there. The weapons that are all the new ones are awesome. They're all unique and upgradable in such cool ways. The characters you meet are all awesome. Isaac is a great character. The end of that game is fantastic. Dead Space 2 is certainly my favorite third-person game ever made. And in my top 2 shooters of all time, Dead Space 2 is so good in my mind. I have trouble thinking of anything wrong with it. It controls better than 1, flying around in 0G instead of being stuck to the wall. Like, in every way I can think of, Dead Space 2 is better than Dead Space 1, which was already great. So for me, this is easy. Dead Space 2 is one of the best games I've ever played and the closest to a horror game I'll ever probably seriously play and love. So yeah, absolutely number 8 is Dead Space 2. Number 7 on this list is probably another game that people on this channel will recognize, Sins of a Solar Empire. I'm going to call out Rebellion here because Rebellion for a few years now has been the main release of this game, but I would include the original Sins of a Solar Empire because that's where Rebellion comes from, obviously. Sins is for me the epitome of what a space strategy, I guess you could say, or 4X game is going to be. A lot about gathering resources, getting new technology, building up a huge fleet, and colonizing planets. Now, there are a lot of, as with everything on this list, you could levy a lot of criticisms against it, but they don't matter to me. Just sitting there playing this game for hours, slowly building up an empire, researching technology to help get me more money, or building a Titan, building this massive machine of war, flying around, getting experience, killing pirates, and then at the end fighting these huge battles against everyone else in the game. And then you add in things like pacts with diplomacy and trying to get other people to like you, and it handles diplomacy in a really fascinating way. It's frustrating at times to have to be like, oh, it's really lame that even if I want to talk to you, guy, we need to send ships to each other. But it's actually really realistic. If you think about it, just because the leaders of two different countries like each other, most of the people won't accept them working together. I mean, that's just politics. Like, there's always going to be a huge number of people. So the fact that you have to send envoys, you can't just instantly team up. You have to work at your empires getting along and being friends and working together is really awesome. And just that combined with the economy and the tech trees, which are all huge, all the races feel unique and different and have different strengths and weaknesses. And the mods, obviously, like, this is the closest, again, kind of cheating using mods, but this is the closest we're ever going to get to a new Star Wars strategy game. And for someone who cares so much about Star Wars, that's a big deal. This game and Forces of Corruption are single-handedly the only reason Star Wars strategy exists today. And even without that, Sins is great. But with that, Sins of a Solar Empire and especially Rebellion is just one of my favorite games ever. Obviously, it's number 7 on the list. Number 6 on this list is only the third to last strategy game on this list, if you can believe that, but it's Command & Conquer Generals, along with the 0 Hour expansion, absolutely. I've talked before about strategy games. You know I love them, and you know a lot of the same reasons that they're all good. But for me, Command & Conquer is actually really special. The first Command & Conquer I played was Red Alert 2, and that game is fantastic. And with Yuri's Revenge expansion pack especially, it's really, really good. I highly recommend that as well. But the reason Generals made the list is partially because of the memories I have. I played Generals a lot more with my friends, and it's the only other game. I mentioned way back in Call of Duty, I played it with my brother. I played Call of Duty with my brother. Before I went away to college, we actually played a little bit of Generals together, and as of this recording, we finally got to play it again for the first time in over 5 years for a few days. And that kind of thing just stays with you. Like, I got to play a strategy game with him, and it's so fun. Generals is so enjoyable. There's strengths and weaknesses to every general if you're playing 0 Hour, and to every faction. You know, the GLA is much more about stealth and cheap units, kind of the spammy group. China, more expensive spam, but also different. Its defenses it's all different, and USA being different. And again, this is one of the ones that is kind of cheated onto this list by modding. Modding for that game, the Shockwave mod is one of the best mods in my opinion ever. And it's just so much fun to play. Again, it's one of those and unlike a lot of strategy games on this list, it's not a long game. It's a strategy game that you should be able to beat with inside of an hour. You know, playing a big match with a couple people or doing like a one-on-one or something. There's always different strategies you can use, and I just really enjoy it. Like, it's one of those games that's kind of held up by the people I've gotten to play it with and the time I've spent with it, versus the games on this list that might be just sheer quality terms better. But for me, Generals means a lot, and especially 0 Hour, and those campaigns are super fun too. I loved playing all of them. They're really fun to get into the storylines of those commanders. So yeah, for me, number 6, Command & Conquer Generals and the 0 Hour expansion pack. Number 5 for me is second to last strategy game on this list, Civilization 4. Now, I know the rage today is Civilization 5 with its last expansion pack, supposedly making it better than Civ 4. And in some ways, I'd actually say Civ 5 is probably better. The hex system has always fascinated me. I actually, as a Civ 4 player, really loved the idea of having these hexes where you had much more organic movement and things like that than just kind of diagonal across squares. That seems absolutely better to me. But that doesn't make it worth it. I've tried playing Civ 5, and I just can't have as much fun. I like the slower pace of Civ 4, where you get to plan out and have your cities be very... You know, cities you don't have to pay to grow, and just so many things about Civ 5 that I tried to play and I just couldn't get into. Well, versus Civ 4, which was so easy to enjoy. And then with Beyond the Sword, when you started getting spies and things like that, and new units and new tech... Plus, if I'm being honest, maybe a little bit of that awesome Leonard Nimoy tech descriptions that he gives you. But this is now we're getting into the territory of games that are kind of propped up while being great. I would absolutely say that Civ 4 is better than Civ 5 in a lot of ways, and is personally for me far more fun. But Civ 4 also has the distinction of being one of the games that me and my two best friends for basically my entire life played hours and hours in high school. The first time I ever stayed up for an entire night was playing Civilization 4 with them, and I don't regret a second of it. I'm even, as of this recording, in my off time, doing a game of Civ 4 with one of my two best friends. Like, I've never gotten bored playing that game. It's the epitome of the one more turn. Like, even the last night before I'm recording this audio, 11:30. Okay, we should go to bed. We both have work in the morning. Yeah, 12:30. Oh man, we really got to go to bed. Finally, at 1 in the morning, we're like, we literally need to go to sleep. We have to right now. It's one of those games where you just get sucked in. You just want to run every aspect of your empire. You want to prepare for war, build troops. You want to work on getting your culture. I'm a big culture player. You want to make sure your workers are improving your cities. You want to manage your diplomatic relations. Civ 4 is just just the whole package for me. It's like basically the part of the reason it's so high on the list is it's, in my mind, better than the Total War games, better than Rome. Like, Rome was fun, absolutely. It's on this list of 20. But Civ 4 was the game that was going to be on the list regardless, partially because of my memories with it. But again, it's a subjective list, so I'm going to put it on here for subjective reasons, damn it. But also, Civ 4 is just so good on its own. I just can't think of a complaint about it. Like, yeah, you could point out some things that are not perfect, but to me, Civ 4 is one of the most time-consuming games that I put my life into more than almost any other, and I don't regret a second of it. It's always been fun, and playing it with friends is an absolute blast. I hope I get to play it with more people in the future. Wink, wink. Number 4 on this list, and it's finally not a strategy game, Halo 1 and 3. This is another part of the reason I cheated and started adding multi-game entries onto this list. But I think Halo, either one of these games would be this high on this list. That's why they're so high with the average system I'm using. Halo 1 for me is the first real shooter I ever played. I was never a huge PC guy, and me and my brother got an Xbox years and years ago, and we played Halo 1, and we're blown away, and that game was so much fun. What a fun game to play and run around in and play through the story and learn all the levels. I could pick up Halo 1 and instantly get through the whole thing, and I plan on it later this year as part of my Master Chief Collection Let's Play I'm going to do, but Halo 1 is such a solid game, and for me, there's sentimental value there. Like, my dad was a gamer when he was younger. He was the kind of guy who played Doom over landlines when there was only, when it was dial-up internet, and he wanted to play with my uncles, and they would have to get everyone in the house off the phone so they could play Doom over the internet. And one of the games I've gotten to play with him over the years is Halo 1. One of the few games that's like a newer game that he really loved and enjoyed, and I loved playing with him, was Halo 1. And that means a lot. And then Halo 3 is probably my favorite shooter of all time by itself. The controls are so good. When I saw them for the first time, the graphics were amazing. And coming off the heels partially of Halo 2, a game where the ending was such a cliffhanger, finally getting to finish that fight. I remember thinking I beat level 3 and saved Earth, and I thought the game was over, and then there's so much more. And I was just amazed by everything I got to do in Halo 3. It was such a blast to play, and until I got into Call of Duty with my brother, Halo 3 multiplayer was my first big multiplayer experience online. I had literally never done almost any multiplayer gaming to any large extent before Halo 3 multiplayer, and I loved it. Going online and playing deathmatch, big team battles, on Sandtrap, what a blast. Some of my favorite memories are Spartan lasering Banshees out of the air across all of Sandtrap and going into theater mode and capturing the clip. I don't know if those clips still exist on Bungie, but that was so much fun. Man, I loved playing that game. Just the controls, so good. The graphics, amazing for the time. And I loved the story. I got into reading the Halo books and everything, and until Reach came out, which kind of butchered a lot of the story for me, unfortunately, and actually did, but not even just for me, it did butcher the story a lot. Halo 3 was like part of this, it was almost like a Star Wars level of love for the lore that I have now, and it was so great to get back into that world after Halo 2 ending on such a cliffhanger, and it totally satisfied. It's one of the few instances I can think of where a game had a lot of hype to live up to, partially because of the huge cliffhanger that Halo 2 left you on, and it totally delivered, and is seriously my favorite shooter of all time. So Halo 1 and 3 together easily make up number 4 on my list. Coming in at number 3 on this list is a pair of games that I'm pretty sure most people thought would be number 1 on this list. Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. Probably the single biggest reason that there are not split entries for games in a series on this list. And I think people will be surprised by what number 1 and 2 are, but that is not to say that KOTOR 1 and 2 are not fantastic games. Outside of modding, unlike almost every other modded game on this list, KOTOR 1 and 2 are fantastic, a blast to play, and some of the most story-rich RPGs I've ever gotten to play. KOTOR 1, as I've spoiled in my video, much to the chagrin of people who somehow don't think spoilers are okay at some point in the future, the entire Revan plotline of KOTOR 1, every second, so tense, so serious, so much weight to everything. I mean, what other game starts off with a Sith Lord blowing up a planet to try to kill you? Actually, not even you, your friend. You're not even the target at the start of that game, but by the end, you're single-handedly saving the galaxy. And the fact that you can... The plotline of being Revan, the fact that you can decide to embrace or reject your own legacy. Not a lot of games do that. Most of the other games just throw you into a character and you're kind of a blank slate. But in this case, you started out as a blank slate, but now you find out you actually have this amazingly incredible history. Do you embrace who you were, or do you try to become someone new and reject that past? It's an amazing bit of storytelling and probably one of the best moments in gaming's history. And then KOTOR 2 improved the gameplay, got a lot buggier, and had a absolutely fascinating story. Like, if you actually think about KOTOR 2 or download some of the mods that fix a lot of the bugs and kind of bring in basically the lost content, that game's plotline is mind-boggling and asks some serious questions about morality and the Jedi and everything in Star Wars. It's all brought into question by Kreia and the plot line of finding the hidden Sith Lords. And I mean, what other game has you play when the Jedi are basically have been exterminated, hunted down by something you don't understand? You could argue that some of the Jedi Knight and Jedi Academy in those games, you could say that they don't have any Jedi around to really add to it. But I'd argue that the Jedi are already dead in those games, but they have been for a while. In this game, you just had a Jedi Order a few years ago, and suddenly they're just kind of silently wiped out. And that brings a lot of darkness and tension to the story that was really hard, I would think would be really hard to pull off in today's day and age, and would be really hard to top, more specifically, by a new Star Wars game. I can't think of a way you could write better than what KOTOR 2 had, so... And, I mean, the gameplay, the obviously pause combat isn't for everyone, but as you can see with Third Age, I love taking my time, and all the RTS games I've done, I love taking my time and taking a second to think about what you're doing. And the feeling of running up and slashing guys with lightsabers, or unloading on them with your party members if you all have blasters. There is no better Star Wars game, and there are few better games overall than the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic games. They beat out at least one of my top 2 games, probably together. But even individually, they are some of the most fantastic games, and the best Star Wars games in the world. So yeah, you should play them. Or you should watch the modded LPs. Number 2 on this list is probably one of, if not the least well-known game that I will be listing here today. Although, if anyone's watched on my live streams, you probably have heard me talk about it. It's the original Empire Earth. Now, up to today's standards, this game is a strategy game lacking in a number of ways. You can't have unlimited pop caps. The graphics aren't amazing. The game is hard to get running, which is so depressingly sad. It hurts me that it's so hard to get Empire Earth running on something like Windows 10 or Windows 8 today. But no game has more tied into my friendships. I mentioned Civ 4 before being one of the games me and my 2 best friends, they're named Alvin and Ed, and I like to think that they're going to be the best friends for my whole life. Before we got into Civ 4, before we even all had laptops, Ed had a laptop and 2 computers at his house, and we could all play a computer game together, and we all played Empire Earth together for hours, planning out our basically our empires. You know, it's not a huge thing. It's not like Civilization where you have cities and cities and cities. No, you're building. It's an RTS game. You're building basically your town, your city, and your army, and mining and exploring. I know I'm saying "and" a lot, but just the feeling of sitting there, talking to them, shouting across rooms, "Ed, you gotta nuke the guy. Ed, I need you to send in your transports. Alvin, why are you attacking me?" We came up with our own strategies, like we would play islands a lot so the AI couldn't cheese us, and we'd build seawalls, which were walls touching the ocean so the enemy couldn't land except for one small spot that we would defend. Just so many memories tied to that game, but it's also so fun. No game today, really, that's an RTS is kind of just so open on the land. So many games are, without even really thinking about it, restrictive. There are so many, like Empire Earth is actually a great example of this. The Empire Earth series really went downhill. I loved Empire Earth 1, where the campaigns were challenging as hell, but they're some of the only campaigns I've ever beaten legitimately. The gameplay was so open, you could build what you wanted. And then in the sequels and in more modern games since, you're limited on what buildings you can build. You're limited on what types of units you can build all the time. You can't just build what you want. And for me, that's what Empire Earth represents, is the ability to do what you want. Heck, you could even cheese people by just building up 1,000 citizens. You could build granaries. You could go with priests or prophets and use conversion and miracles to kill your opponents. Build up an army. I love to build up just an army of guys with guns. Boring, I know, but it's awesome. Playing throughout the eras of history, a few times in my life, we would literally go from the prehistoric age where you have clubs to the nano age where you have fighters and lasers and giant mechs. The breadth of history is unrivaled. I can't think of a game that spans history with so many steps in between. Like, so many games you could say start in the prehistoric age and into the future, sure. Empire's Dawn of the Modern World did it, which is kind of the spiritual successor, but still isn't as good. But in Empire Earth, 15 ages. Prehistoric Age, Stone Age, Copper Age, Bronze Age, World War I, World War II, Modern Age. So many steps taken that genuinely represent history and all have different units. Yes, you could argue they have rock, paper, scissors combat, but the ability to go to any time in history and fight with those units and build an empire across history. Maybe you want to go into World War II from World War I level technology, or you want to take time in World War I to build up junky old tanks and rush them before they can start building stronger armor. Building battleships and patrolling the seas, building fishing boats and exploring. Nuke bombers. One of my favorite memories is Ed turning on me and sending nuke bombers into my base while we were on a team and just burning my base down, and me just like breaking down like, Wyatt, no, and then just the laughter that ensued after. Some of my favorite memories with this game. So yeah, for me, number 2, my second favorite game of all time is Empire Earth. Before number 1, a few honorable mentions. I'm just going to let the pictures go by because I don't really want to take even more time to talk about these games. But these 5 games that are honorably mentioned are great, and you should still play them. Number 1 is maybe a surprise to some people, but to me it's not. I've had this opinion for over 5 years that this is my favorite game of all time, and I can't genuinely say that it has changed. The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Now, for many people, that's going to be a shock, especially considering my views on Skyrim, which are mostly disappointment. But when people say to me, Tim, you loved Oblivion, how come you don't love Skyrim? I can't explain it. I did a almost daily vlog years and years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago at this point, 4 years. But I stand by most of what I said. And this is maybe puts it into perspective more. Oblivion was amazing to me. I had never played Morrowind or any of the Elder Scrolls games. To play this game where when I was a teenager, you got to just go and explore this huge world, so colorful and bright, and you could do magic, you could do swords, you could do axes, it felt like anything. Like, I wandered into the Imperial City the first time I played it and just joined the arena by accident. And I couldn't finish it right away. I couldn't just declare myself champion of the arena. I had to go and do side stuff. And that was amazing to me. Like, wow, I can't finish this. I have to get stronger. And joining the Mages Guild, the Fighters Guild, the Thieves Guild, the Dark Brotherhood. I didn't even do the main quest line for hours and hours. And then doing the main quest line, Martin's Septum, the ending of that game, fighting through Dagon's, Disciples of Dagon and everything. The DLC for that game is some of the best that's ever existed. I would argue that even some of the dumb little house stuff, or Mehrunes Razor, I'd say is probably the best minor DLC, but God, how embarrassing is it that I can't remember the name? The Shadow Isles. Sheogorath's Realm. You know what I'm talking about. That's probably my favorite piece of DLC ever. Like, a whole world, a third as big and crazier by an exponential amount. So much new and so much content, and the mods that I've played for that game that I've loved. So many amazing things for me, and so many hours and hours. Oblivion is by itself the game I have played more than any other, probably, with maybe Civ 4 pushing it. But single player, over 300 hours between Xbox 360 and PC. It's got its problems, like I said earlier, as like the number 1 game on this list absolutely has problems, but man, that game more than any other defined what I loved, and it's still fantastic. I'm sad that I don't have more time in my life to keep playing Oblivion. Every now and then, I mentioned earlier Fallout 3, I never wanted to go back and play. On a pretty regular basis, I'm like, why don't I just download some Oblivion mods and just play Oblivion again? Why don't I just do that? And just start, and maybe just try to do a totally different character, and just go through the arena again. Oh, so amazing. So yeah, for me, Oblivion is my favorite game of all time. Thank you all so much for watching. Feel free to leave your lists in the comments below. My name is Timpedia. I hope I've encouraged some of you to check out some of these games, and I hope this puts into perspective a lot of the things I like and dislike in gaming. But until next time, everyone, thank you so much for watching again. My name is Timpedia, and I will catch you guys later.